welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Today's episode is really overdue. I've asked a lot of questions in various episodes. I've got a lot of great responses, a lot of really interesting responses, and it's time I took a little while and took an episode to tell you about some of the things that people have responded with. And I thank you very much for the information that you've given me. I've learned a lot of really cool stuff. In the very first episode, What I Love About the Beach Boys, I asked, is there anything to love about the Beach Boys in the 1990s? And I got some interesting feedback on that, some suggestions for things that I can enjoy, maybe not things that I necessarily love, certainly not as much as other Beach Boy music, but some interesting responses. Mixed Music suggested Lahaina Aloha from the 1992 much maligned Summer in Paradise album. It's a pleasant enough song, not bad. It's got that gated drum that makes it sound very dated at this point. It has an accordion in the background that I wish they'd mixed a little higher. It's pleasant enough. It's probably one of the stronger things here. Thanks for that suggestion. Also, Drew Sarinsky suggested It's a Love Thing, which apparently was featured in Baywatch Nights, also known as Summer of Love. Again, it appears on the Summer in Paradise album. And it also, you can find it on YouTube over either the beginning credits or the end credits of Baywatch or Baywatch Nights. And we'll talk about the Beach Boys in the 90s and Baywatch and John Stamos and all that stuff at some point. Mainly the video is cool because you get all 5 Beach Boys including Brian. The song is got Mike Love rapping, so be warned about that. I'll tell you though one thing, Mike Love is better at rapping than Brian Wilson proved himself to be on the unreleased Smart Girls from the Sweet Insanity sessions. So I'll say that for Mike Love. He's a better rapper than Brian. Outlaw Rickenbacker and Thomas Ogg, who has a great Facebook page called Catch a Wave, Beach Boy fan site, really cool. They both suggested She's a Mystery, which was released in 2013 on the Made in California box set. It's from the Brian Wilson, Andy Paley sessions. It's got Carl on it, I believe, maybe some of the other guys. It's very enjoyable, very nice vocals, and it's probably as close to a Brian Wilson-led Beach Boys track as you're going to get in the 90s, though it didn't come out until 2013, so I'm not sure if we can count that as what they did in the 90s. You can quibble about that, draw your own conclusion. I think I agree probably, though, with Tony Ball's suggestion that as flawed as Brian Wilson's solo work in the 90s was, it's probably the strongest work to come out of the 90s. And I would say that if I'm just going on the strongest album, probably, or the strongest work, it's probably Brian Wilson's Imagination album from 1998. I mean, do I love it? There's some stuff on it that I like. I don't love it to the degree that I love the other things I talked about, you know, Don't Worry Baby or Pacific Ocean Blue, Holland, Brian Wilson Presents Smile, even things like No Peer Pressure. I don't love it like that, but, you know, that's probably the strongest thing you're going to get out of the 90s as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, thank you guys for those suggestions. Really interesting stuff. Moving on to the second video that I did about Blondie Chaplin and Ricky Fataar, which has been very popular. I was really surprised and really happy that people have really taken to that video because they're great. I really, really love those guys. I heard from Lana Gersman, an old friend of Ricky and Blondie's going back to the 60s and the Flames in South Africa, who has some really interesting comments not only about Ricky and Blondie but also about the Beach Boys. If you haven't read those on that episode, check that out. She's got some really interesting things to say. Also, she pointed out that I forgot to mention Ricky's work with Bonnie Raitt. He's worked extensively with Bonnie Raitt. It's been a big part of his career from the early 80s onward as a drummer, percussionist, backing vocalist, sometimes as a co-writer. He's done a lot of work with that. Obviously, both these guys have done so much I couldn't mention everything, but Lana is correct. I really should have mentioned Ricky Fataar's work with Bonnie Raitt. I also heard from Steven Buxt, who's working on a documentary about the Flames, which should be really interesting. I can't wait to see it. So Good luck to you, Steven, on that. Please keep us posted. I also, in that episode, asked the question, on Beach Boys in Concert, what is the deal with this picture of a guy with an 8-ball over his face? And one person suggested that maybe it was Billy Hinchy. I've always assumed that this 8-ball was meant as like an insult, or like to write this person out of the Beach Boy history. Well, Justin Plank, who has a great YouTube page and is a really enjoyable speaker on the subject of the Beach Boys, and has a great Facebook page called Beach Boy Related Artists, came up with the definitive answer, which came from no less than photographer Ed Roach and keyboardist Gary Griffin, who confirm that the man behind the 8-ball is Carly Munoz, the keyboard player or pianist for the Beach Boys at the time. Now, like I say, I always assumed this was some sort of insult. Apparently it's not. I don't know why he's behind an 8-ball, but from everything that I can tell, I mean, Carly worked with the Beach Boys until probably the early 80s, at least around 1980. Don't know of any sort of negative thing that has been said either way by the Beach Boys about him or by him about the Beach Boys. I think they got along great. Did a lot of work with Dennis Wilson. Why he's behind an 8-ball is still a mystery, but I think we can pretty well say the mystery is solved. It's Carly Munoz. Thank you, Justin, for settling that question. Moving on to the episode, Mike Love, The Realistic Years, I asked in that episode about an obscure 45 of Jingle Bell Rock and Let's Party by Mike Love that had been released in 1983 somewhere. I'd never seen a physical copy. Tony Balls put me on to the fact that that single was only released in the UK and in Holland. And he also put me onto the fact that there were some available through Discogs. So I now have, proud owner of the actual physical Mike Love 1983 Jingle Bell Rock with Let's Party on the B-side. I had heard it, this is the label. This is not on Realistic. It's on Creole in the UK and some other label in Holland where it was also released. There you go, in case you're interested in seeing the label. As I said at the time, it's better than the stuff that was released on Realistic. It's at least got sort of a more contemporary sound to it. There's a little bit of drive behind the music that's missing from the Realistic stuff. It's not good, but it's better than the stuff on Realistic. And yeah, a little more contemporary sounding in a 1980s sort of way. So there you go. Thanks, Tony. I'm happy to have it. Happy to get to show it here. That's probably really the only thing I'll ever do with it, but it's cool to have. Thanks. In episode 11, Elton John Meets the Beach Boys, I should also have mentioned that Elton John inducted the Beach Boys into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1988. Gave a beautiful introductory speech, which then of course was overshadowed by Mike Love's infamous acceptance speech, so people pretty much forgot about what Elton John said. But I should have mentioned that. Minix Music also pointed out that in the same year, 1988, on this album, there is a song called Since God Invented Girls, which actually name checks Brian Wilson and has Beach Boy style harmonies. Later on, after the episode Elton John Nearly Meets Steve Lewis, Minix Music also pointed out that I was mispronouncing the name of this album. Of course, we all know Elton John's birth name was Reginald Kenneth Dwight. And you would figure that short for Reginald is Reg. But somebody somewhere had told me that the English pronounce it Reg, not Reg. So I've been calling it Reg Strikes Back for years. Of course, you know, the English spell color color, and they spell theater thetra, so you never know. They do pronounce aluminium aluminium, and they spell it aluminium, and I respect that kind of consistency, so I got to give it to them on that. But anyway, thanks Minix Music. I stand corrected. I've checked with other sources. It's Reg Strikes Back. So whoever told me it was Reg years ago, you've been making me look foolish all this time. Anyway, thanks for that. By the way, Minix Music has a really cool band called the Fantastic Flying Frogs that you can find here on YouTube. Clearly, he has paid a lot of attention to both the Beach Boys and Elton John. You can hear that in his work. Really cool songs, really cool artwork too. I urge you to check it out. While we're talking about pronunciations, sometime later in Randy Bachman meets the Beach Boys, Tony Balls pointed out that Randy Bachman's name is actually pronounced Randy Bachman. And strangely enough, I knew that. I had heard interviews where he had said that, but all my life, since BTO 1 came out, around where I lived, he was always Randy Bachman, and I've heard it said over and over, so it's really hard for me to remember to say Bachman. But you're absolutely right, Tony. It's Randy Bachman, and I'm going to learn it. Also, Tony had an interesting comment about the Fonzie's Favorites album that was mentioned in the episode Endless Summer and Happy Days. Tony tells me he actually owned a copy of that album and that the cover would fold out into a stand so you could stand it up and admire that picture of Fonzie from anywhere in the room. I also find out that the album had a different track listing in the US and the UK. On one of those versions, and I'm not sure which one, there's a track called the Fonzarelli Shuffle that I have recently listened to here on YouTube. It's got all the catchphrases from Happy Days, but if that's not enough, it's also got all the catchphrases from Welcome Back, Kotter, all done very poorly over a very annoying musical track called the Fonzarelli Shuffle. If you want to hear the most cringeworthy, embarrassing piece of music you'll probably ever hear, check out the Fonzarelli Shuffle from Fonzie Favorites. In the episode Smiley Smile and Late in Hawaii, I wondered about a comment in the liner notes to the early 90s CD issue of Smiley Smile, where they mentioned that the song She's Going Bald originally had lyrics about a speech-making businessman. And I said I hadn't heard of that. Max Evan commented that it's the track He Makes Speeches from the Smile box set, which of course it is. I had heard this before. I don't know why I never paid any attention to it. And the fact that it's called He Gives Speeches kind of gives away which track they're probably talking about. Though Max points out that the title is more of a description. Apparently there was no title on the tape box, so they just called it He Gives Speeches. More of a description than a title. Musically, it's really identical to She's Going Bald. It just has lyrics about someone giving speeches, possibly Murray Wilson. Who knows? Anyway, it's here. I should have figured that one out. That's just me not paying attention. But thanks, Max. Appreciate it. Derek Dudes commented on Jan and Dean Part 1, where I had said that the first Jan and Dean album was 1962's Jan and Dean's Golden Hits. He corrected me. There was a 1960 Jan and Dean album, the Jan and Dean Sound, sometimes called the 1960 Jan and Dean album. Now, I obviously had this album. I always thought that this was a later compilation. I didn't realize that this was originally released in 1960. So in my collection, I've moved it from the compilation section to the front of my Jan and Dean album section. So thanks, Derek. Really appreciate it. Derek seems to be a really, really knowledgeable person about Jan and Dean. When we get to the further parts of Jan and Dean, Derek, I hope you'll chime in. Really appreciate it. Thanks. Got some very nice feedback as well on the episode about David Marks. There's at least one more David Marks album that I was not aware of at the time called The Circle Continues from 2012. I found out about it through Endless Summer Quarterly, which is a magazine I had heard about for years and years and only recently subscribed to. I don't know what took me so long. I was actually able to score some of the tracks off The Circle Continues by buying some of their back issues that included bonus CDs. Been eagerly devouring this and back issues of this for the last several months. Great, great piece of work there. And I have been able to score at least one physical David Marks album back in the garage. His stuff is very difficult to find, and it appears to be very expensive when you do find it. Hoping to locate more music from David Marks, and also I'd like to talk more about David Marks in a future episode, particularly his work in the 90s onward with the Beach Boys, starting with the Beach Boys Salute NASCAR. There's David rejoining at least Mike and Bruce for this album in 1997. Miami Dan posted a nice comment about what a generous person David Marks is, and gave me a link to his video, High Surf by Miami Dan and the Hay Street Band featuring David Marks. I'll post a link to this video. It is great. The music's great, the playing's great, nice video. The thing I love about it is the introduction. You know what's going to happen. They telegraph it completely. It's no surprise. You know David Marks is in it from the title. But if you've seen those videos where a baby watches a Jack in the Box pop up and just laughs hysterically every time it happened, I watched the intro to that video about 6 times, and every time, even though I knew exactly what was going to happen the first time I watched it, it cracks me up every time. It's so cool. Check that out, High Surf by Miami Dan and the Hay Street Band featuring David Marks, and I'll try to post a link to that as well. I really want to thank everybody for all the positive feedback and all the support. Outlaw Rickenbacker always has some great comments. Brian Kruger has been so supportive from the very beginning, technically, and always supportive. Matt Hale, thanks for the comments. Everybody, I'm sure I've left some people out. This has really been a fun experience, and I hope to continue learning a lot of stuff about the Beach Boys, meeting some great people. Thank you all. We'll see you next time. Bye.